As I mentioned, there were no members of the church in Lithuania when we got there. Within a short time, we welcomed the first missionaries, 6 missionaries from the St. Petersburg Russian mission who came and began living in Kaunas and in Vilnius and began teaching the gospel. Within a short time, we had enough people to start a small branch. One convert or 2 converts, a husband and wife, both of whom were doctors, joined the church. He later became our first branch president in Kaunas. And we began teaching in the university, as I mentioned. Ruth taught the history of sacred music, and I taught American studies and American literature. It was an English language university, fortunately, because Lithuanian is an extremely difficult language to learn. Although we learned some rudiments of it, and I learned so I could give small, short talks in sacrament meeting, and I was able to be able to shop and buy things, but not because I was that adept at it, but because I could point and pull out some money. But the students were wonderful, and we're very grateful to have Americans who were teaching. And so teaching in the university, I found one of the things that I found, and Ruth did as well, is under the Soviet system, any discussion was really discouraged because if you had something to say, it would seem like you were thinking you were smarter, better than someone else. It was really hard to get my students to engage in discussion about literature. I also found it was they didn't have proper texts, so one of the things we did is I just purchased texts and gave it to them. I mean, on our UCLA retirement, we were almost like the Medici in terms of what we could do, because the system, a doctor may have made a couple of $100 a month, which was less than a taxi driver made. And so with a little bit of money, you could do a lot of things. And so in our teaching, for example, we took 60 students and faculty from our university to Vilnius, which is 60 kilometers away, to the opera, and to buy the tickets for 60 students and faculty, and to rent a bus cost less than it would have been for Ruth and me to go to the opera in Los Angeles. So that's how much discrepancy it was in terms of what we had and what things cost there. So it was really nice. If somebody needed dental work, we could just give them the money to get their dental work done. And Ruth was particularly wonderful. I can't say enough about how caring she was. She began to, we were renting a hall, and it didn't look much like a chapel, and so she was able to requisition chairs and a little pulpit, and she began supervising the translation of our hymnal into Lithuanian, so that we would have a little hymnal to use, and just a number of, and she was training choral conductors. She was just doing so many innovative and really imaginative things. She began consulting with the Lithuanian state chorus, which is a great chorus, a great choral tradition. And I remember asking this man, who was really a very gifted choral conductor, she said, is there anything you ever wanted to perform that you haven't been able to? And he said, oh yes. He said, Bach. She said, what? And he said, well, either the St. John's or the St. Matthew's. And she said, well, which one, if you could? He said, I'd love to do the St. Matthew's. And she said, okay, let's do it. And he said, no. He said, we don't have scores. She said, I'll buy the scores. And he said, really? You buy the scores? And she said, yes. And he said, but we don't have a place to perform it. She said, I'll rent the Philharmonic. So we rented the Philharmonic, gave the tickets to anybody who wanted to come. And the first performance in Lithuania ever of the St. Matthew's Passion was just a result of Ruth's generosity and her very loving spirit. And I remember after the concert, people were coming up and talking about it. And one of the members of the New Branch presidency was just a really lovely man, but he was a carpenter. And he came up and stood in front of Ruth for a minute. He couldn't speak really. And then finally he just put his fist to his chest and said, "Tape," which means, in Lithuanian, means yes. And Ruth said, "He got it." But that kind of thing was characteristic of Ruth. Again, she had dinners for all of the missionaries. We had a number of missionaries. One of the things that I did was to work with the Lithuanian state television to get, I got copies of the Tabernacle Choir broadcasts that were being broadcast on national television. I got some other programs from the church on church programs, and they were being broadcast on national television. And then I asked one of the producers at Lithuanian State Television, would you be interested in doing a documentary on the Mormon Church? And he said, "Are you kidding? Of course." And I said, "Okay, I'll arrange. We'll get the money. I'll arrange for you to go and spend at least a week in Utah, and you can interview anybody you want." And I set up interviews with Elder Holland and with some others, and they went to BYU. They interviewed the person in charge of the archdiocese, the Catholic Diocese of Utah, and came back and put together a documentary called "The Golden Angel Over the City," which is about Moroni flying over the city, and that was a way in which it really helped our work for people, because people essentially thought of Mormons as polygamous. We were a cult. There was a lot of rejection or resistance, especially by the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church had been under siege during the Soviet period, and so they now it was the state religion, as it were, or certainly the predominant religion. There were other religions, but the Catholic was, and they weren't exactly happy to have Mormon missionaries coming. But by having an interview with and one of the Monsignor, or whatever his position was in the cathedral in Salt Lake, was able to say and broadcast on Lithuanian state television, the Mormon Church has been very friendly with us. They helped when we were renovating this building. They contributed funds for the renovation of this building, and we worked together in the community. So that was really a nice experience. We also had them another television program do a documentary on the missionaries. He filmed the missionaries singing and doing their proselytizing. So it was just a way, again, in which to be able to have the freedom to do things that would really help, and to teach. We, as I mentioned, we were teaching English in the public schools, and the missionaries were doing that. It seemed like whatever we wanted to do, we kind of had the ability to do. And then I was called into the mission presidency, and then Ruth and I traveled to Estonia and to Latvia and to Kaliningrad. We had mission conferences. Robert Blair was called, who had been a faculty member at BYU, a member of the linguistics department there, was called to be the first mission president of the Baltic states, and was as ideal a mission president as one could imagine. He was, again, extremely flexible and very practical. I remember when it was time for tithing settlement, I was in the branch presidency of the branch in Kaunas, and this doctor, Arunas, was the branch president, and I said, we've got to do tithing settlement, and he said, "What's that?" And I explained it to him, and he said, "I'm not going to do that." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "That's the kind of thing the Soviets did. They wanted to get into people's finances, and they wanted to do that, and I'm not going to do that." And I said, "Well, you've got to do it." And he said, "Well, I'm not going to do it." And so I called President Blair and said, "I've got a branch president that's not going to do tithing settlement." And he said, why? And I told him, he said, that's okay. His relationship with the church is more important than doing tithing this year. So it's fine. And that spirit that Bob Blair brought to the mission in every way, I mean, he was just such a great mission president, and his wife, Julia, such a great mission mom, that it was just a great privilege to work with someone whose spirit was, let's find out what works, and let's do it in the spirit of love, and let's work together. So it was really just a terrific experience to be working in these countries, working with these young missionaries, some of whom had to learn 2 languages, Lithuanian and Russian, Latvian and Russian, Estonian and Russian. And just a kind of devotion that was so absolutely inspiring to me to see what these young people were willing to sacrifice for something that they believed in.